Might help if you used it.
I will in a second.
One, two, test. 1, 2. 1, 2, test.
Testing mine. I turned it halfway. Okay. I think we'll just sit and talk to y'all if that's okay. The three of us are going to be talking to you, and a lot of the focus will be on the slides, at least from the parts that I'm doing. Thank y'all for coming out tonight. The three of us, as you know, went to Uganda, to the Sudanese refugee camps in June of this year, and so we all wanted to share with you. Let's open with a word of prayer. Thank you, Lord Jesus, for this time together, for the opportunity to learn and share a little about your work in the world around us. We pray you'll continue to bless this ministry and our involvement in it. In Jesus' name, amen. Yeah, he's going to do a video first. I'll let it fail to you. Testing 1, 2.
Try jumping.
They were trying it a minute ago, it was working.
You can't go up there.
One of the goals of the church, apparently, is to get a better technical system here. And so you can all see why.
But Bunches, what about getting new technicians?
I love that.
Take yours and I'll take mine. On the right-hand side, I'll rest and you'll find that you take rest in one. So take these words and make them right. So one day you and I will write our names in the sky. We'll confide and I'll find mine on the right of your side. And I'll find mine on the right of your side. If I throw away my fear and pride to set things right, then I'll find mine on the right of your side. brothers and sisters, fill these cups with life. Please forgive them, 'cause they know not their lives. So take these words and make them right, so one day you and I will write our names in the sky. We'll confide, and I'll find mine on the right of your side. And I'll find mine on the right of your side. If I throw away my fear and pride to set things right, then I'll find mine on the right of your side. And I'll find mine on the right of your side. And I'll find mine on the right of your side. If I throw away my fear and try to set things right, then I'll find mine on the right of your side.
Tonight we wanted to open things with the little video, which y'all have seen, some of you have seen before, and then just the format of the evening. I'm going to share for a few minutes about just a little background about Sudan and why we're working with the Sudanese refugee camps. Then and a little of the history of my involvement with them, with Sudanese. Then Rufus and Jackson are each going to share for about 15 minutes on their involvements in this trip and their impressions and things. And then I will share a little about going forward, and so I have some questions at the time if you have questions, and then close up with just showing a few of the slides from our fun time at the end of it, going to the game park. This time we were working with the Sudanese refugees, and I just wanted to give you a little background on Sudan and the Church of Sudan. In ancient Africa, Sudan was Cush in the time of the Bible, mentioned several places, and it was the land between the rivers. I think it's probably in that one of those mentions anyway may have been between the Blue Nile and White Nile sections, which is up toward Egypt, Ethiopia. But Egypt governed parts of Sudan at times. Ethiopia was involved. That whole area was kind of meshed geographically, though it was made up of lots of different tribes doing their thing. The British and Egyptians together in the 1800s controlled, it was not a colony, it's a word you've probably never heard used politically. It was a condominium, the government of Sudan was. And in the mid-50s, the Sudanese were given their independence, at which time the Arabic North took control. And so the Arabic Islamic North became the government, and the South was separated from the North at that point. Under the condominium, things were dealt with a little differently with Southern Sudan, because these people were tribal, animistic, and early Christians. Missionary influence was great in the South, though there was a lot of missionary influence in the North also. And the South came to consider itself a Christian and African culture. In the 50s, after their independence, the Islamic government came up and took over stronger and stronger into the South, drove out all missionaries basically by the early 60s. In the 70s, there was a constant civil war between the South and the North. There was a little time of peace in the 70s, but you basically had 50 years of civil war until 2005, when a peace treaty was signed. In 2011, the government of South Sudan was established and became the newest country in the world, and the country officially divided. The South Sudanese, which had a common enemy against the North, and functioned for those 50 years. Then the two main tribes that made up the government primarily started a civil war again. It started actually in the presidential bodyguard and all. And we've now had 5 years of civil war again. So this is the backdrop for missions. Was there in the first part of the 1900s, and a little bit in the 70s, and then some early stuff in the late 90s. And missionaries went into the country and more force in 2005, which was when my friends the Matusiks moved in. They had already been working with Southern Sudan, but they moved in, and we as a church have been supporters of the Matusiks, who have now left that mission field because of their family needs. But so in '99, I was, let's get back to slides again. What works? Side button. In '99, I was encouraged by a missionary friend to go go take a medical team to South Sudan. Two of us docs did so, and we landed on a strip in the Nuba Mountains. This plane had crashed there a few weeks before. At the end of the strip, hit a stump, so you don't feel real safe on these dirt strips, obviously. That is, the Nuba Mountains is now in the north of Sudan, and one of the most persecuted Christian cultures in the world. But we spent time there in the Nuba, and I'll just flip through some things. They are still actively bombing. There's the war between the South and the North at that point, and the Nuba aligned itself with the South, and so, you know, I have a piece of a bomb fragment that had been from a bomb crater not far from this one, where I think it was 11 children had been killed a few weeks earlier. Occasionally bombers would fly over while we were there. We never had bombing runs while we were there, but the people would scatter and hide. We moved from that camp. We weren't supposed to stay there too long for fear of becoming a target, so they moved us to, a long story, but to another part of the country, to another large internally displaced people camp. And that was probably the worst off conditions I've ever encountered, all the starvation and all that was going on there. We were just there a few days, but the needs were huge. Then I went back with a missionary that I met at that area, went back to that part of Sudan, which is not far from where Pastor John and most of the Sudanese here, many of the Sudanese that come to our church in the Sunday afternoons are from. And so these were people waiting across the swollen stream to come to our clinic. See one white guy in that bunch, I think there.
Very white.
I had quickly raised a bunch of money to go on that trip and were blessed with having enough money to pay for a whole flight of food to be flown in. These were starving people so this was the first grain shipment that had come to that area. One of my second trip there, I think it was, I met Steve Matusik, and we had been friends and had a relationship with them ever since. He, after they moved into a different area of South Sudan, wrote me, urged me to bring a medical team there because they didn't have any health care, and we did. And this is how we've gotten in and out of the country over the years on MAF or AIM air flights. And I'll just flip through a few things. Gotta watch out, things like cows on the runways. One place I went to, when the Matusiks were out of the country, I went with another team elsewhere. We went a river ride on the river that runs about 30, 40 miles south of where Pastor John is from. Liza likes this picture because she says they just painted the color in on me and everything else was black and white. This was not far from the Matusik home, where during the more active fighting with the North, some bombs had been dropped, and not far from the old mission home there that they took residence in, there was a bomb sticking in the ground with a bunch of bricks on it because kids had thrown rocks at it. And I've taken a number of folks over there with me over the years. That's Martha with me and a little guy with Down syndrome that we met there. That's the church there, Lokotog. And the Matusik family, they were young when, that's not when I first got to know them there, but they had little kids that have now grown up. I was reading to them, and that was, I think, this past November when I was there. Got big kids now. That was their house originally, which was a mission home used in the 1940s and 50s, and then basically vacant, except for being used for storage of hay and a lot of scorpions in it, which Steve renovated, they used, and it's been added to it, a much better facility right now that the new couple will go into. And we have gone and held clinics. That's a young lady from Texas who has served in South Sudan, a American gal, who wonderful ministry she has. Martha. That's a girl from UNC Med School that I took with me on one of my trips in the truck, which we took out to villages to hold our clinics often on the nice roads. And sometimes we would help, that was on the main highway, we would help tow other vehicles out. And operating rooms weren't always very convenient, kind of hard on the back. That's the rainmaker of the village. They have the landlord and the rainmaker, the two, and the witch doctor are the three main authorities in the villages who.
And the chief.
And the chief, yeah, who run all relationships with the evil spirits to keep things going. We took a Sunday afternoon walk up onto one of the hills. I can't go backwards on this. Leprosy is a disease we all hear about from reading the Bible and all, but you can see there how you get lepers who have just, their bodies have been destroyed by the disease. This was that same river trip I went on earlier, that the whole village, it seemed, gathered on the riverbank to wave goodbye to us. They gave me a goat. Have you tried to haul a goat on a boat? It's just got a rope around its neck.
A goat on a boat. With the rope.
And that's in that town, Akobo. I've read mission biographies now I've obtained of early missionaries there and built this Chapel of Hope in 1948. This is a lady who had a terrible disease. It destroys the nasal passages and all. And we flew her to a medical team. A friend of mine was running in Uganda. They rebuilt her a nose, at least. There was kind of a ballad written about her in that village of the lady who had no face. Surgery at night with all the bugs flying into the wound. And this critically ill child just looked like death warmed over, but a couple of days later was sitting up. Lots of kids everywhere. There's Sharon and Liza and me. Sharon's been my most faithful team member. You can see there's not a lot. You kind of hit out of the bush there. A cholera epidemic one time, and this lady just had crawled down the hill from. She was so weak, just could drag herself barely on the ground. Well, that was in the Nuba Mountains that time. We walked out to hold a clinic in a village and had some camels hauling our stuff. We don't have camels in other parts of the country where I work. So that's just a little background on the first 18 years before. Now the war has, during the last couple of years of warring, there are over 1 million people have fled into northern Uganda, 1 million more into Ethiopia, Central African Republic, and elsewhere. And so we've started working with a man, almost there to him, I guess, a guy named Moses, who I first met, I think, in 2010. I found these old pictures yesterday of Moses. This was far away on the other side of the Nile, several hundred miles from where I've made contact with him now, and he's now a pastor that we're working with. He was doing some evangelistic work in this unreached tribe when I first met him. That's me trying to preach to a little group. Click. Is that the end of that? No. And that was the little center that Moses had helped start there in that unreached tribe, and which now has, not far from this village, has half dozen missionaries with AIM are there and evangelizing that tribe. So somebody there told me people over the years have come to us, but nobody ever comes back. So I went to this place for about 5 times, and then the road got too dangerous to go there. And the one other time we were going to try and go, last time we were going to try and go to another part of the tribe, halfway there, the car broke down, so that's Moses. Okay. Sorry about the clicker issue.
And as you can see, the last photo before this one was of Moses, and so that kind of transition. And I'll give an overview of, and Moses also in this photo, he's the, and Moses also in this photo, he's in the middle on the right, in the collared shirt with the brown belt. And the far right is Isaac. He was our driver, so he picked us up from the airport, and we spent a lot of time with him. We spent a lot of time traveling to places. And to your left, you have Joseph, and we have Moses, another Moses. And they were pastors in a particular, they were in Yumbe district. And so Yumbe district we went to on the second half of the trip. But so through the video, just for overview, through the video that you saw earlier, that was kind of overview of just the trip, like a weekly, and it was kind of, yeah, it was chronological. And so we left June 3rd, that was Sunday morning, and we came back on June 13th, and we flew from Washington. And it's a small detail, but it's important for me. But we sat on the runway in a plane for 4 hours before we left.
In D.C.
In Washington, D.C. Wasn't clear on communication why, but I think it was like 100-some bags were lost, and then other issues happened. Which isn't a big deal, but God worked it out for me at least and showed me some things in my heart and just perspective-wise. But one of the issues is because we were delayed 4 hours, our last flight, once we got in Uganda, only went twice a week. It was like a Tuesday and a Thursday, I believe. And was it Tuesday and Thursday? Oh yeah. Oh, Tuesday and Friday. We're trying to make Tuesday. And if we got delayed from that 4 hours and weren't able to find another plane to get there, we would have missed the trip, and that would have messed up our whole week because we couldn't get where we needed to go. It would have been a bus ride, but maybe like 8-hour bus ride, and that would have still put us back. But God graciously provided, and yeah, we actually flew from Dubai to Ethiopia, and then to Kampala, and then from Kampala to northern Uganda. In Uganda, which is south of South Sudan, the border, we were able to visit 9 of 11 churches, so physically be at 9 of 11 churches. Then one church was able to travel to a church. So we saw 2 churches at one, and it was, so 1 of 11 churches we didn't get to visit, but we got to visit the members because they came and visited us at a church. And so, and it was 2 districts we kind of went to. One was Moyo, and the other was Yumbe. And the first district we went to was Moyo, and it was various churches in that district in Uganda. So where we were at, those 2 districts was northwest Uganda, and those in the refugee camp. So it was very different in how we, I guess, when you see the media and you see where there's a lot of poverty, this is what we saw in those Uganda, in those refugee camps, and we saw that daily. And so when we first arrived, we arrived in Aurora, and as David was sharing, it's a dirt airplane runway, and there were cows there, and also, well, we didn't have cows when we landed, but yeah, it's a dirt runway where cows can come on at any time. But when we arrived, Isaac, which is far right, he picked us up, and Moses was there as well. And as soon as we landed, we started, we went to the city. We picked up some chairs that the church was able to have some funds and buy plastic chairs, which is a big thing for them. And we picked those up, and then we went to our first church. And there we received a big welcome. People were there. They ran out to the car and they were singing and chanting. And from there, this is an example of being received. So you can see just people that are receiving us, a lot of children, and then you can see the housing and then like the crops they have to grow. And they have very limited space, so everything is kind of closer to the crops run up to the house almost. But yeah, so when we got there, we kind of prepared on the way. We talked with Moses, and Moses, he wanted us to talk about 3 things that he thought that the people, the churches would be beneficial in hearing. And the 3 things were faith, forgiveness, and hope. So I talked about faith, and David talked about forgiveness, and Jackson, he talked about hope. So we had an opportunity to share a message and just speak about that, and then we had an opportunity to interact at each church with people. And so I took what a day would look like. We would wake up in the morning and we would have breakfast, and then we had time to, during breakfast we had kind of like a quiet time where we could pray and be prepared for the day, or get prepared for the day. And we would figure out where we were going, what churches we were going to, and how to better interact with them, and how we can relate the message and serve them well. So that was kind of a typical day. And so after breakfast we would get, and these places were very far off. It was like an hour drive, and those roads, you can see pictures from David earlier. Those pictures, the roads were very bumpy. It was, I think we got a free massage every day. But yeah, and I was surprised because it would take us an hour to get there with the car, but the church members, they would have to leave like early in the morning to meet us. It would take us hours to get there, and they would walk there. And but they could walk a lot faster than what we would walk. They're used to that. And so yeah, we had an hour ride, and we'd go to the churches, and we would share, we would speak, and they were very hospitable. Yeah, we would also dance. Don't let Jackson fool you. Jackson likes to dance. Yeah, and then after we would share, we would just share, and we would listen to their needs and to listen to their just things, how God was working there. And also, we couldn't leave without eating a meal. And this was at every church. So they were always, and this was just a way that they would bless us, and this was where we could fellowship with them. And yeah, the food there, they were limited. So the Ugandans that are in the refugee camp, I apologize, the Sudanese that are in the refugee camp in Uganda, most of them don't have jobs and don't have a way to provide for them. And the food they get are from the UN camps and other camps and organizations there that provide food. And it's really basic. Well, one thing is, most of the time they don't have meat. They just have beans, and it was like not potato mash.
Almost like
Potion.
Yeah, it was a potion. And I was trying to explain it, but it's like almost like a bread pudding, and it's, but no sugar. It's a bread pudding, and yeah. And then they would have like greens. Sometimes they would mix together, and then meat was a very it was a delicacy, and they would graciously bring meat together and provide that for us, to offer that to us. Yeah, and then after that, we would just try to just be with them when we could, and learn from them and walk with them. And after that, we would travel to other camps and churches. And the churches we met at, when we meet on a church. We meet on a tree most of the time. And then they had some structures where they were able to put together, and they would use smaller trees, and they would make like a A-frame roof. And we might see some pictures later, actually. And you could, And then you also can see those in the video. And for, I guess, pews and chairs, they would have like a tree. They would just cut down and they would just lay it on the ground and then put it in like a wide fork and that would be a chair. And then other times they would sit on the ground. Or they could bring in things, but yeah, but the,
Rufus, when my mom saw that picture in her 80s, and she's lived in America her whole life, the branches to make seats, she said, why would anybody sit on anything like that? And I explained to her there was no other option. But, you know, that was just inconceivable to her, that anybody would use that for a seat.
yes, and so if you couldn't hear, she said, why would anyone sit on that? And why would they sit on the tree branches or tree trunks? And yeah, there was no other options. And they used what God blessed them with. But that's one thing to realize is that the building, the physical building doesn't make the church. So that was something that we know in our theology and we think about, but to be able to experience and see that, that was a blessing to be able to see. Okay. And just, so that was kind of overview, and then a quick, just a perspective on some things God was doing and showing me. One thing was material. As I said before, there was a different level of poverty when seeing that there was nothing they could really provide for themselves, of themselves. It was God providing daily, and it was in ways that would seem miraculously, well, seemed like a miracle, and they were. And one thing that I saw from that is God helped me with the paradigm shift for me is that God does that for me as well, but I'm blind to that because I think I provide in the sense of through my job or through other ways that God has blessed me with, and but God has blessed me with those things to provide, and He has given me those things, and He does that every day, just as He does that for them every day, and it brings it helps me see more of the light of the Lord's Prayer when giving us our daily bread every day. Another thing, just spiritually, one thing God was working on in me before the trip, and He kind of used it more in the trip to reveal more things, is culturally, culturally seeing poverty. I think with my American view and Western view, I didn't expect God to be there in that way, and a sense of spiritually just how joyous they were and how devoted they were, and how okay, I'm gonna backtrack just a little bit. One thing I was praying for before going, I was worried about, was I just wanted to worship truthfully and faithfully. I was like, God, will you allow us to do that, and we'll worship you in the God of the Bible. Before going to South Africa, one thing we dealt with a lot was ancestral worship, and that was something that just was on my mind. So going to Uganda, I was thinking about that, praying for that. And and God, He was there, and we worship truthfully and faithfully the God of the Bible. But one thing in that God showed me was He provided and showed me that He is a God of nations, and He is there with those people and His people, just as He is here with us. And reading the Bible, I know that, but being able to experience that and see that, God just helped with the paradigm shift, and I wouldn't have that skewed view of like, okay, God is here, but they might be worshiping a different God, right? But yes, God is there, He's providing, He's working there. And and that was just one thing I want to share. And another thing I want to share is cultural perspective. It was a little different, and it's better if I could just share like one specific story. Is one day we were having dinner, and the picture before with the 4 gentlemen, we were having dinner with them, and also Moses' wife. And we're sitting there at dinner, and our drinks were brought out, and our food was coming. And I look around, and I'm the only one who hadn't touched my beverage yet. And I look at the South Sudanese; they had all drank. They had already drank their beverage before the meal was gone. And then they were talking, and then they looked at me and was laughing at me. And I was wondering why. And then, so they shared, and one of the things was that they were saying, yeah, you're definitely not from around here, because one of the things, when you get your food, as soon as you get it, you consume it. And the reason why is because being affected by the Civil War, that David was sharing about earlier, and being affected by at any time a rebel faction can come through and just, I guess, pillage and run through a village or run through a city or run through a particular place. They were saying once you get it, once you pay for it and you get it, you consume it because you never know when that can happen. Like, you could be in there and you want to drink it, but then that happens, you got to run. And I'm like, oh man. And that was one thing that I take for granted here. With the law enforcement that we have, we don't see that. We don't have to think like that and have that perspective and that mindset. So that's just one thing that was different. And then that led to other conversations that were very interesting and very enlightening. Yeah, and that was just one thing I want to share with perspective. And with that, I'll turn the mic over to Jackson.
Thank you. Yeah, it was definitely interesting to have conversations like that one at dinner. And just hear the different mindset that they have, and hear the reasons why behind the things that they do. And just hearing about why they eat so quickly, because their village could be ransacked at any time. That's the background that most of these people are coming from. We heard stories of plenty of the women have been raped, men have been killed. There's even stories of women being raped in front of their children, and then the children being forced to kill their mothers with a gun afterwards. And so yeah, there's just crazy stories like that you'd never even think about. You'd never think that those things would happen. But these are the kind of people who are fleeing South Sudan and who are coming to Uganda, and so they're coming to these camps like this. All that white, those little white specks, are tarps from the UN. So basically, most of these people have just put together some sticks and tarps over these sticks, and that's their house. They have a small plot of land where they can grow some corn or sweet potatoes or whatever. Most of the houses are not more than just tarps. Down to the right, that big white building is actually the first church that we went to. I'm standing up on a hill near a well, and that's actually a nicer church than most of the ones that we saw.
The only one with a roof.
Yeah, it was the only,
With a roof.
yeah, one of two that we saw with an actual roof. But yeah, so this is the kind of condition that they're living in. In the video, I don't know if you noticed, there was a part when we were driving in the Jeep, in the truck, and you can see the landscape, and you see all these dots, these white dots. And it's really cool to look at, but then you think about that's people's houses. And yeah, it was just really sad to see the condition that they're living in. But I want to kind of talk about their attitudes in spite of that. It was really amazing to see how much joy they had in spite of these situations. I know I've told a number of people a little bit about this, but that's the thing that really hit me the most is how joyful and how happy these people are just to be living, just to have the little bit of food that they do have, in spite of their circumstances. And another thing I've said quite often to the people I've talked to is I don't think that if I was in their situation, I would be reacting the same way. I think if I was forced out of my country under these circumstances, I would not have that joy that they have. And they not only have joy just in their everyday circumstances, but they also have hope. And that was actually a bit of a challenging thing to talk to them about, because that was my topic to speak to them about, was hope. And it was hard to know the best way to encourage them and tell them to be hopeful without giving them false hope. Because all of them hope to go back to their home country one day, go back to their land, go back to their houses, and just be home. And it was a bit difficult to know the best way to encourage them to be hopeful in Christ without giving them a false hope. And so it was, what I had to do was just make sure I was encouraging them to hope in Christ, and knowing that He's helping them in their situation where they are, and every day, and He's not letting them down where they are, and maybe one day they will go back, but maybe they won't. But God does have a plan for them, and that's what they can hope in. So, yeah, there was a little bit of a challenge trying to encourage them in that. But this is just an example of part of the camp. You can see some structures there. Those are nicer houses. But then everywhere around these houses and tents, you see things like this. Pigs in the mud, and lots of goats, and just farmland everywhere. But kind of the last thing I want to tell you about, because we do want to get to some questions and tell you about what kind of David's vision is for this coming October. But this is Isaac, who Rufus mentioned earlier. He was our driver. So he drove us around everywhere we went, the whole trip. And it was cool to talk to him and get to know him. He's got a fun personality. He likes to joke, and so it was fun to laugh with him. His English is pretty good, so we were able to have pretty good conversations. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit about him personally, so you can make a personal connection with someone over there. He's married. He has I think 3 kids, all boys, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And he was born in South Sudan, but now he's living with his family in Arua, and he drives for a living. So whoever will pay him to deliver something or to cart people around like us, he does that to provide for his family. But before, kind of when the recent fighting had started in South Sudan, he was actually driving people out of South Sudan into Uganda, and he would make those trips carting people out. And he did that for a while until he said it got too dangerous. Robbers would ambush drivers on the road, and he said that happened a couple times. And even one time, there was one instance he was driving around a curve, and an arrow came and hit right here on the driver's side door. And it could have easily killed him if it had been any lower and gone through the open window. So he stopped that driving just for the sake of his family. But he also hopes to one day go back. He did become a Ugandan citizen, and he does own land in Uganda. So I asked him, I said, if there's ever peace in South Sudan, like, are you gonna keep your land here in Uganda and stay here? Or do you want to go back home? He said, absolutely, I want to go back home. Yeah, I hope that's given you guys kind of a little glimpse into the people and their situation. Our trip was mostly to encourage them and just let them know that we are here and we're praying for them, and we want to help them in the ways that we can. But moving forward, be able to share what the hope is for those people.
He is the exception in having become a Ugandan citizen and not in a camp. Moses had a passport already before all this Civil War stuff, so he was also able to be legally into Uganda and not into the UN refugee camps. So those were two main people we worked with. Let's see what we got here. Okay. I wanted to share with you what our upcoming plans were. South Sudan is still on my heart, and my heart's desire is to be able to get back to Lokatok, which the missionaries have left. We're waiting to see if another couple will come like they're supposed to. And there are a couple other couples in the area. But trying to see whether we can get accommodated to take medical teams back there. The people in Uganda, well, Moses initially wanted me to come hold clinics there because the needs are big in the camps. But they're so big and so overwhelming that there's just no way I can take a small team and touch it. And we leave to MSF and Medical Teams International to try and do work in these camps. But the people have medical needs. The churches have many kids die and all. So the leadership, each of these, Moses oversees 11 little churches. Each of these churches have some body or bodies who are leading them and heading up worship and trying to do the various teaching that churches do. But Moses and the several others that are more influential and a little more educated who are leading the churches would like to have someone come teach the pastors just some basic Bible and theology and all. Moses went to a Bible school in South Sudan that was run by Open Doors, and his organization somehow is linked with a group of Foursquare Gospel, which I know nothing about really, but he's of a more Pentecostal, charismatic background, more Pentecostal background, and he and I had some discussions, theological discussions. He's a good Christian guy. There are many things that I think he's just not been taught about the scriptures, but the books I've tried to supply him with, I've tried to supply him with some things that have some good solid teaching, so anyway, he wants us to come bring a team to lead, and also the people working with the kids at each of the churches would like to be taught how to work with the kids and youth. Some of the youth have choirs that they sing and dance. They have some Sunday school type groups, but they need materials and help. And they just haven't been taught. They really have requested, why don't I bring women with me ever? Well, this is the first time I brought guys with me, but anyway, I brought me before. But so I brought these guys with me, and a lot of the refugees are women. Many of the men were killed in fighting. Many or some have stayed back in a rebel army or have stayed trying to watch the village's cows or something that have been stolen, and watch the lands. but the houses have been burned and destroyed. So there are far more women than men, and that's part of why they would like some women teaching the team too. There have been many other needs expressed. They want medical help, which I can't help them with. So I went last year, May or something, or June of 2017. Moses and I had corresponded by email. I'd known him in the past and then met him in Juba a few years ago. And he had, after his whole town had fled south to Uganda, he had urged me to come. First, I went and to observe, decided I couldn't do medical things there, listened to the needs, which were many. We helped purchase, well, we helped several projects. First of all, I did get Moses a motorcycle. He needed to be able to get around to these various places. So I had raised some money to get some help with some things, and various friends. I didn't get monies and assistance through our church directly because I sought some of you and some others in the church gave, but I wasn't really making the main appeal to this church. Because I felt like we had a lot of other needs going on, but blessed with all that had been helped with. So Moses got a motorcycle. We got Bibles in the Berry language for each of these churches, Bibles and hymnals. The Bibles have already been well used, and they need more. And it turns out that now we've taken a little census on it. There are 9 languages represented in these 11 churches from people from various tribes. 9 languages that have some translated scriptures to those languages, and we would like to get some native tongue language for each of the people that we can. But the Berry is the common language which most of them know some of. They also know some Arabic. We got sewing machines. The women wanted something to do. They're there in these camps with nothing to do, no way to earn any living, and I'd been asked for sewing machines because so they could start some projects. And so I got two treadle machines for each of the 11 churches. Several of the churches have clustered together when they found somebody who could teach them how to sew, and so people are coming from further distances to learn. But it's wonderful to see them using them. And that chalkboard there, you can't see very well, but has some patterns drawn on it. They need chalkboards for their churches for various things. But that's a project we were able to help with, and I was really happy to see that money hadn't just gone away, but it's being used. Gave the sewing machine and $200 something for show off that they had made. One other small sidetrack on that, one of the places, the teacher for them, he learned to sew in northern Sudan, in Khartoum, from Korean missionaries there, which delighted my soul, having been raised in Korea and knowing that the Korean church is sending so many missionaries. Simon, this leader here, that's not Simon. Oh, that's Simon, yeah. Simon was a carpenter in South Sudan. He lost everything when he fled. He had a carpentry shop, and he apparently is a good carpenter. And he's a leader in the church. I don't know whether he considers himself a pastor or an elder or what there, but he said, look, got about the sewing machines for the women. I'd like to start helping the men, the young men, have something to do. And he would like to start a carpentry workshop to teach young men how to make things and furniture and all. So he tallied up a thing for me. You know, for $4,000 or $5,000, we probably can help them get started on that. I think would be a good thing. And you know, I've told them, if y'all get jobs, get money. That's a way to get money back to the churches. We want your churches to be self-sufficient. I don't want to just be furnishing for you. The leadership needs teaching. These are various ones of the leaders, including Rufus, I guess. And Jackson are in pictures, but those are some of the leaders there. And they want more roofing. They have no way to get money. They're in these camps. I don't know how they got enough money to put a roof on the church at the big tree, but they're packed out apparently most of the time. These were weekdays that we met with them, so most days. So they said they have more people on Sunday, but this particular building, they would like to extend it by 15 or 20 feet. They want money for roofing. And the other buildings may not have a roof at all. They put posts in the ground expectantly for being able to sometime get themselves enough to build a church. Far in the distance, the little blue stripe behind the center post is the Nile River back there. And I said, oh, this is up on a hill a little above the village. I said, this should be called Nile River, Nile View Friendly Hills Church. This on the right, you can see the posts where this group hopes to have church, and they're holding their services under that tree beyond. And this place has a orange tarp roof, and it was difficult to even do things, function in there for me, just because everything, the glare in the African sun was just orange. No airflow. Yeah. And there are innumerable kids that can be taught. And, you know, I just urge them to be teaching scripture memory. These kids learn, and they learn by memory easily in that culture. That's, you know, repetition and passing things on generation to generation is their way of doing things. But they had a youth choir come dancing into this one place, about 20 or so, mostly young ladies, but young ladies and young men singing and dancing to us, for us. And they fed us lunch, and this was a common dish that all the kids were reaching in and grabbing their Ugali stuff out of to eat. And so I held a camera up over them, asked them all to put their hands in at the same time there. So then we had, this just goes through, okay. So we have done projects, we plan projects. The missions trip this fall is one of those things. I'm trying to raise money to do the wood shop, some of the roofs, some more Bibles, and a few other things, maybe some bicycles for some of these other pastor evangelists who are working in these churches so they can get around. But the last day of the trip, we did scurry down to Murchison Falls Park, which is a beautiful game park, and falls on the Nile River, which are amazing. And we had a great fun day at the end of the trip. So, are there questions? Yes.
Where does Moses get gas for his motorcycle?
That, northern Uganda has cities, he lives in a city, and that have fuel, okay? So, yes, he can get stuff there. He doesn't have any money, he doesn't have any income. Yesterday, I sent him a couple $100
Here's your mic,
just,
David.
huh?
Here's your mic.
Yesterday, I sent him a couple $100. I'm not supporting him regularly, just I knew he was going back over to some of the camps, and he said he had to try and figure out how to get some fuel out. So we talk once a week or more and text every couple of days. Yeah, it's available. If he runs out while he's out in these camps, I don't know, walk 10, 15 miles and find somewhere to get it, I guess.
Is gas expensive?
About 50% more than here.
Really? How do you become a Ugandan citizen?
I don't know.
I just wondered if it was a long process.
It's not an easy process for a refugee can't easily.
Yeah, Isaac didn't say much about it, but he did say it cost him a lot of money, and there was some heavy testing involved.
What's the range in temperature?
It was pretty reasonable while we were there this time. 80s, low 90s maybe?
Probably 90s,
They're always hot.
Mid 90s?
90s, yeah.
Okay.
But that's kind
Humid.
of winter for them. Like, that's low temperature.
Gail?
What about the language? Did you have an interpreter, or did they understand English?
We speak through an interpreter to the churches. The leadership all speaks varying degrees of English. And for me, I'm not a natural preacher, even though I come from a long line of preachers. I like preaching with an interpreter. I can say something, think before my next sentence because somebody's getting interpreted.
And sometimes there were two interpreters.
Yeah, there was one point when I was talking, and there was a guy interpreting into Juba Arabic, and I was talking, he'd say something, I'd talk, he'd say something, and then there was this kid yelling from the back of the church. We were all under this tree, and he stops and he said, wait, and he looks at the kid, and then he looks at me and says, hold on, I've got to go take care of this cow. So he runs off, and I was like, okay. And then one of the pastors gets up, and he says, I'll translate now. So I was like, okay. So I said something, he said something, and I started to say something again. He said, no, wait. And there was another guy, and he said something again. So that guy that ran off was the only translator from English to Juba Arabic. So we had to translate from English to Bari to Juba Arabic at one point. But he did come back eventually, and the cow was okay.
You never know fully what message people are getting when it's double or triple translated, okay?
Exactly.
And Moses' wife does have a job. She's an accountant.
Yeah, she hadn't had that job very long, so they have some income from her job, yes.
Are Bibles in 11 languages available somewhere?
Apparently so. There are probably portions of the Bible, some of them may just have, Book of John or something, but there, because there's a lot of Bible translation work being done by Wycliffe and a couple of other groups in SIL, which is, anyway, our headquartered in Charlotte. But there are people who are working on Bible translation. In South Sudan has 67 languages. Under the British system, English was a unifying language. Under the Arabs, Juba Arabic, which is a strain of Arabic, was the unifying language for so everybody has a tribal language, knows Juba Arabic. Some still know English left over from the British days, and so a lot of people may know another neighboring tribal language. Very complicated. The Tower of Babel did amazing things. Yes?
Where did you stay? Where was your housing?
Yeah, we had good housing actually. This time we stayed in Aurora a couple nights in a nice hotel. It was very, not rustic at all. And then
Still had cockroaches though. Still had cockroaches though.
And then we went to this Catholic guest house place in Moyo called the Multi-Purpose Center that the Catholics run, and a lot of different people use it. That has these kind of wings of buildings out there that have rooms that just very rustic cell-like room with a bathroom that doesn't have a shower curtain or anything, but did have a shower. And some got hot water, some didn't. A shower and a sink and a toilet and a bed. Really reasonable accommodations. And then there's a restaurant area place that you could get chicken and fries, or fries and chicken, or goat.
Yeah, the accommodation was pretty nice, but in Moyo, I was a little nervous going to bed because over my bed, right over my head, there was a big hole in the ceiling, and it was just pitch black in there. So I was a bit afraid that a bat would come shooting out as soon as I went to bed, but thankfully I had mosquito netting, so that might help a little bit.
Especially since I had taken them for a walk in Moyo down from the Catholic Center down this road that is lined with big old trees that is a nesting place for the African fruit bats, Egyptian fruit bats, which is the size of my fist and wingspan that wide, that are just literally tens of thousands of them lining the underneath side of the branches in these trees. I mean, you get splattered walking under them. So I'm sure bat fears were reduced.
I thought I was going to become Batman.
Other questions? Yes?
What armies or bandits, what country or groups of people were attacking these villages? Where were they coming from?
Yeah, South Sudan had the two main tribes got fighting each other. They pull in all the other tribes with various militias that have banded up to fight with one side or another side or switch sides. And then a spin-off of this is just plain criminal banditry that is developed, that the little small independent armies go around and raid villages and steal cows, which is the currency of that part of the world, and or steal women or kids for slaves. It is very hard to figure out who's fighting who or why they're fighting who, but the government forces, the main government forces are no better. They are not legal as they go in and kill and steal but it's, you read the Old Testament about going into a village, going into town and killing everybody in the town or whatever. It's no different.
And the people we were interacting with, they would say the Dinka were the group that affected them the most. And as the stories Jackson was sharing, their personal experiences were received from the Dinka.
The Dinkas, the main government control people of the Dinka tribe, and they have been the biggest problem. Now, this week there's another peace treaty. It's happened about 5, 6, 7, 8 times in the last 5 years between the Dinka and Nuer, and we'll see. Interestingly enough, it was brokered by the Bashir, who's the evil dictator of Northern Sudan, who they were fighting against for 50 years to the north. And now he's the one who brokered the peace deal between the two main factions, the rebel side of which he has been a big supporter of, and Uganda's been a supporter of the government side. I can't figure out the world politics.
And yeah, just a little bit more of likewise. After returning, I was in Walmart a window, and I actually ran into a Dinka, and I had a conversation with him about it, and then he was saying it's confusing for him as well, and also like the Dinka, there are Dinkas that don't like Dinkas because of the way there's like a radical element in them, but the whole group is generalized, and he had to flee, and he fled here about 10 years ago.
David, isn't John,
Christ is the only answer for that country.
isn't Pastor John a Dinka?
Pastor John is Nuer,
Oh, he's a Nuer.
though there are some Dinka in the congregation here.
A catch is a dinga. Yeah,
Catch is
a
dinga.
catch is,
Catch is Dinka?
uh-huh.
Were you guys ever afraid, other than night being bats, but did you ever feel uncomfortable, like being really scared or anything?
No, not at all. Even that night with the bat, wasn't as scary as I made it sound, but yeah, I felt really safe there overall. There were a couple times when we saw the army come through, or some people with big AKs on the street, but yeah, I felt completely safe there. I didn't really get scared at all, even when a representative from the Arua district was actually shot in Kampala one day when we were there. Not in Kampala, but he was shot and they flew his body back to Arua. Even then, I didn't get really nervous or
There
scared.
was a riot in the
But-
street as we came back to town,
Mhm.
and we had to go a little cow path around the town to head toward Murchison. But, I mean, it was on TV news and all in Uganda, because the House of Representatives person from that town had been shot.
Yeah, it's actually generally safe there. Rufus and I actually had a conversation with Moses about the kids walking down the street, because you'll see kids everywhere walking down the street to get water or whatever, and these kids are as little as 2 years old, by themselves or with another sibling that's just as young. And we were asking Moses kind of about that, like why their parents would let them do that, and he was saying like there's no reason to fear, in Uganda at least, in that area, there's no reason to fear. But we were saying we never let kids 2, 3, 4 years old walk down the street by themselves. Yeah, I'm sure in South Sudan it's very different, but in that part of Uganda it's pretty safe.
Yeah, Uganda's benign compared to Sudan.
I asked the Greers when they were there, and we were at the, went over to the orphanage and worked 2 weeks, about their daughter who is Korean. I said, does it ever scare you that Eliza Min is different? And she said the Ugandans say to them, they never say we would steal your child, they always say, will you take our children? They just can't handle their own kids. So they were never worried about any kind of kidnapping or anything like that. At least that was what, maybe 8 years ago, when they were 6 years ago when they were there. That's Uganda now. I know you're in
Are
camps
there
here.
schools for the refugee children?
Limited. There are UN schools, they don't have enough teachers for them, but then the camps themselves, the there are school teachers who have fled from South Sudan who I didn't see them on this trip, but are, one place there were last fall, there were about 800 kids in one area that were the school, that there were 3 or 4 teachers who had a chalkboard there teaching all these kids sitting out on the ground or on a little piece of wood they had brought or something. And the head guy I talked to had one desk piled high with booklets and papers on it, and that was the principal's office and school administration, okay? And these guys that were doing the teaching weren't getting paid. They were just trying to find something to do and trying to help the kids. And I walked out to where one of them was teaching and looked at this 4x8 chalkboard he had there, and he was teaching about what missionaries did.
Muslim strong.
And
Muslim strong.
In a row, yeah.
her question was, are Muslims strong, the presence there?
In the northern Uganda culture, there are lots of Muslims, and we went through villages that were apparently almost all Muslims, with Muslim schools and Muslim kids walking down the streets to the school, to the road, the dusty roadway to the school, and in the camps they're getting more and more Islamic, and they're building mosques and all. The Muslims pour money into infrastructure for building mosques, and they pay schooling for kids, and in the Islamic, they build an Islamic school, they'll pay to send your kids there, but you gotta come to their mosque and agree to their religion, and it is a big and growing issue there. Agree?
Yes. And
Yes, Lydia?
I was gonna say, please just don't do what I did because I ended up trying to raise up some money to help these guys out, and after I raised the $50, I totally lost it. I couldn't find it, and for a while I was so upset. But then I had some other different pile of cash, so I still gave them some money. But this money I've lost, I can't even find even right now.
It'll
So,
show up.
so just don't do what I did. So.
We'll pray that you find it, Lydia.
Please do.
How widespread is the Catholic influence in Uganda?
In South Sudan, the Catholics were very influential for coming in there 50 or 100 years before the Protestants did, and they went to villages and baptized everybody and told them they were Christian, and that's what a lot of the South Sudanese saying that South Sudan is a Christian nation. They're still totally animistic, but that's how they became Christian. And there's a lot of Christian influence throughout Uganda, but the Sudanese Catholic influence is spread out into the camp areas too. And there's a big Catholic church being built by the road there that somebody put a lot of money into, and it, Protestants need to keep up. I mean, part of wanting to help these little struggling churches get up and going is that they need a presence so they can continue growing as a unified group in a culture that's not going to stay real favorable to them from Islam and Catholicism pouring money into work there.
And to add on to answer your question earlier about the schooling, the experience David was sharing was before in South Sudan, correct? The experience about the desk and the pamphlets. Okay. But for those who we have visited, that would be a very, like a blessed experience and a lot more than what they actually had. Those we visited and spoke to, they had nothing, and it was like 2 moms trying to teach 100 children every day in a school, and that was one request they wanted, if we could partner with, was just getting books, pens, kid materials.
Yeah, they just want, little notebooks, and they want chalkboards, so they can write stuff out, kids copy them down and read them and study them. They want that kind of basic, and pens, and, the needs are huge. We cannot assume, we can't do everything. I have tried to figure out what we can do that is not making them dependent on us, that is trying I think to help the churches prosper is an important thing. If we can teach leadership, if we can help them with structures a little bit now because they don't have any resources to have structures, if we can help them have Bibles, which I think everybody should have, those are basics. I don't want to pay salaries of pastors or anybody. I don't want to be building anything fancy or ostentatious. I want to just help them have some minimal stuff. To help the evangelistic type people get around to their people and all, I think that's a fair thing to try and do. But I tell them, like with the sewing machines, I say, look, I'm giving you these. I'm not going to keep pouring sewing machines into you. And you're going to have to figure out how to make some money and buy some more. Though I may give them a little bit more money if I can get it, to get a little more material and things. They have patterns, which I should have brought tonight, which I'll bring at missions conference or something, out of, tarp type material like we use our blue tarps, old torn tarp material, and out of heavy kind of grocery bag thickness brown paper that they'd made themselves they'd sewn some clothing and things just to practice on sewing, because they don't have scrap of material to practice with or something.
Can they write in the dirt or the dust?
Yeah, but just dust writing doesn't last.
No, I know.
One thing with that though was interesting because it was a lot of dirt floors, and but they would go out and sweep, and they would keep that clean. It would be spotless, and that was very encouraging to see just how they steward that well as well. And one thing what really surprised me was they made us a beautiful kind of cards, like Hallmark cards. Kind of made Hallmark look really bad. And
The ladies at one church, yeah.
The ladies at one church, and I looked at it and it was just like beautiful, and I looked up to open it and it was blank, and then they were like, well, we would love to write you a message, but we just didn't have a pen to write, we didn't have a pencil to write it. And that was just something that we take for granted. We could find a pen, and it's like, we look at it like, oh, we don't want this pen, we leave it where it's at. But they don't have any pen.
The art on the front was made with
Banana leaves.
banana leaf, dried in different, so it had different colors of brown that was made very artistic.
One of the best parts was after they came back home, I always have a thing that with each team, I made them this welcome home sign to come back home. So that's what I always do.
That's good.
Anybody have anything else they want to ask? We'll let y'all go. We've gone over time. Thank you for coming. And just pray for what we're doing. This work with the Sudanese is a ministry that I've just been gradually called to for the last, almost 20 years now, 19 years, and it's kind of evolved its way through various paths, but I think this helping of the refugees is a valuable and important project. So, I'm looking forward to continuing doing some stuff with them. You want to pray?
All right, let's pray. God, we just want to first thank you for the gift of prayer and that you allow us to come before you and submit ourselves before you and supplication and thanksgiving and faithfully. And God, we thank you that you listen and that you answer. So God, we want to uplift now that we thank you for this time where we're able to share fellowship with one another as a body and just see what you're doing in our lives and what you're doing in Northwest Uganda and with the South Sudanese there. God, would you continue to be with us and would you place them on our hearts that we may continue to uplift them and pray for their needs and pray for their material and spiritual needs and trust that you would provide. And God, you give us patience and discernment and wisdom and how to support them and love them well and help, but not help in a way that hurts. And God, will you give them patience and just wisdom and how to use and steward what you have blessed them and what you provide through people that are able to support them. And God, we pray for the churches. We pray for our church. We pray for your Holy Catholic Church around the world, your Church Universal, that you just continue to bring us closer to you, that we may know you and enjoy you more. So thank you for this day. Thank you for what you're doing, how you provide for us in every moment. And may we live in light of that. And may we live a life that testifies to the gospel. And may we be ever dependent on you and rely on you. In the name of the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit we pray. Amen.
And be with Moses and Joseph and other Moses and Samuel and Simon and David and all the ones leading the work there. In Jesus' name, amen.
I hope so too. I just can't believe that happened.
And. Oh, thank you.
Bye, Ann.
Need help up?
I'm okay, but if you want to stand there, that'd be great too. What time is it? I think I'm
11:20.
I was gonna say, did it?
Thanks.
She said
Right, yeah.
I'm gonna give this target this one.
Oh, the Bible.
Would you cut your hair short?
You're welcome.
That was great, guys. Thank you. Hello, Mr. Box. How are you?
Oh, good. Good for you, though, to figure that out.
Can you stand for me?
I guess. I thought,